It's all part of the plan.
Zero.
But when I say the one,
5, you are coming with me.
Them a 5th of November that shall never, ever be forgot.
And now it's time for V for Vendetta, Part 3, Treason in Plot, Part 2.
In Part 3, Part 1, we handled 3 of the movie's 5 plot lines.
V's mission, Evie's metamorphosis, and Finch's investigation. Handled is such a strong word when so much is left to be desired. Wouldn't you agree?
More to be desired indeed. So we'd better get to those last 2. Onward we go.
Not what I meant.
Nobody cares. So, the love story between V and Evie is competently handled, if a little standard.
It's peppered very sparingly throughout the film, building up and resolving in fine form. V seems smitten with Evie as soon as he saves her in the beginning, and this frames the whole rest of their relationship.
V is a little different around her than he is with anyone else. His air of fierce determination and of total clarity of purpose drops, and he shows some vulnerability and even a little awkwardness befitting normal human interactions, which have presumably been missing from his life for quite some time. So this angle adds some humanizing texture to V and a pinch of relatable drama to the story.
The only problem is, say it with me, it's underdeveloped. For economy of screen time, it's played out too quickly and blatantly to be truly effective. The result being that there's not enough there for its stakes to matter to the overall plot.
The main setup is here, after V shows Evie a thematically parallel movie centered around latent revenge, The Count of Monte Cristo.
Did you like it?
Yeah. But it made me feel sorry for Mercedes.
Why?
Because he cared more about revenge than he did about her.
But this element is so sparse and buried in everything else that's happening that when we arrive at the big payoff where V follows suit with Robert Donat as Edmond Dantes, it just hasn't been built up enough for this to be an actual dilemma. We know exactly what course he's going to take, because V's character actions haven't been and won't be affected to any real degree by his affections for Evie.
Not so, cretins. It was meeting Evie that inspired V not to blow up Parliament himself, but to let her decide. As an essential shaper of young minds myself, I can certainly identify. Let them do the dirty work, while I do the interviews and praise their bold, progressive vision. So V turning his grand plan over to Evie doesn't matter for the plot?
Well, no, not really. As V aptly states,
This world, the world that I'm a part of and that I helped shape, will end tonight. And tomorrow a different world will begin that different people will shape. And this choice belongs to them.
which is really his way of saying that his story, that we've all tuned into, is ending, and the attack on Parliament isn't really part of it. The announcement of his intention to do it was significant, and had its intended effect, which we'll come back to.
But the act itself? Not so much. It begins something new that we don't witness, which we'll also come back to.
Well, what'd you expect him to do? Change his mind and ride off into the sunset with Evie? If you're looking for that, don't watch V for Vendetta. Check out High School Musical. Cheap shot. Nobody was looking for that, but having this little effect on the character...
I can't.
And so exponentially less on the audience, begs the question, why have it in there at all?
Because it shows how easily a girl can fall for a basement-dwelling masked vagrant that destroys property.
I don't think that's...
But how, in the end, blowing stuff up for a crowd is more important than love.
Speaking of things that stray from the point...
Whatever.
As an aside, We find out here, in retrospect of course, that confining and torturing someone he not only likes, but is in love with, took a pretty serious toll on V.
Every day I saw in myself everything you see in me now. Every day I wanted to end it.
Sure, it's a fairly effective, well-paced reveal when we find out he was her captor.
Then you have no fear anymore. You're completely free.
But could there not have been some way to unveil this to the audience a little earlier, so we could experience some of V's moral and sentimental dissonance with him? This one's purely subjective preference, but hey, food for thought. Before we get to the last plot thread, let's take stock of what we have so far, and address a lovely elephant in the room.
As we've stated, this is a tapestry of characters and plot lines that weave together with the utmost logical and coherent flow, but are severely lacking in its most crucial component, the emotional content.
It's like a gourmet burger with the most absolutely succulent bun, cheese, bacon, and condiments that money can buy. The makings of one of those burgers that costs hundreds of dollars from the YouTube countdown videos. But then,
a standard Wendy's beef patty.
not the end of the world. Certainly a burger I would eat, and I'll bet you would too. But there's just something missing, and it is sorely missed.
So, maybe the Wachowskis and director James McTeague just weren't up to the task. Perhaps they just weren't capable of building true heartfelt empathy into these characters and properly pacing out and developing their plots. Well, that might seem plausible. Until we get to this.
My name is Valerie. I don't think I'll live much longer, and I wanted to tell someone about my life.
V's next-door neighbor in the experimental torture cells of Lark Hill scrawled her autobiography on toilet paper as she was dying and passed it along to anyone who may find and read it.
V did. Then he recreated the experience for Evie, who then recreates it for us. And experience is definitely the word for it. Valerie details the evolution of her life, from the fearful confines of a conservative upbringing, to a liberation of boldly asserting who she is, regardless of the consequences,
to realizing her dreams and aspirations, both professionally and personally, to having everything gradually stripped from her, leaving her a heartbroken, demoralized, diseased mass.
But never sacrificing her integrity or returning to her fearful roots by disavowing who she is or what she once had.
Now, this sequence plays technically like many others in the film, with flashbacks set to voiceover.
I remember how different became dangerous.
But the timing, pacing, and selection of details of her life are doled out to perfection.
How and why did they get it so right this time? Because it was all geared toward one objective, making an emotional connection with the audience. And, ironically, with no overarching priority of exposition, this sequence is actually surprisingly informative as well, giving us a more insightful look at how the general climate of Britain changed as Norse fire dug in and seized the life of the country.
Here, in one of the glowing highlights of the film, for the first time, we get it. We take the journey along with Valerie. No matter how different our lives or situations are, we're right there with her.
As cinema goes, it doesn't get much better than this, and that really kind of magnifies the frustration around the other sequences. This proves their ability to do it right, and they're almost kind of throwing it in our faces here. If they can pull this off with such flawless storytelling ease, why do they only do it to develop a character and plot sequence that function purely as a backdrop and aren't even technically a part of this story?
Mind-boggling, isn't it?
Did you just say mind-boggling?
Yeah, mind-boggling. You know, when things are so crazy, it gets your thoughts all trapped like in a bottle?
Yes, it definitely bottles the mind. Wrong again, dimwits. The Valerie sequence shines not due to these tired, long-since obsolete ideas of storytelling, but because of the identity boxes it checks. The entirety of its value derives from Valerie's sexual orientation, and the ethnic, racial, and cultural variance that's sorely missing from the rest of the film. It's exclusively these qualities that elevate its cinematic merit. Their actions and dynamics within the narrative being secondary at best.
Yeah, any movie that doesn't have these things needs to be cancelled and deleted from film history.
Can you believe this?
There's definitely something that should be deleted.
Excuse me, that's hate speech.
Not too far off. So, to conclude the main plot threads, last and, well, least, we come to the Londoners taking a long overdue stand against the regime.
This one is so meager it's barely in there, popping up infrequently through news broadcasts being watched by jaded individuals growing more and more cynical and disillusioned by the day.
Bollocks.
So how does it go? More of the same. Rushed, curtailed, no time for an adequate hook.
It does get quasi-personified in Dietrich, in that he retains his doubts about the government he lives under but goes along to get along, all the while harboring secrets that could get him killed, which inevitably saddles him with a debilitating burden that expresses one of the movie's primary themes, fear, which we'll come back to.
While underdeveloped as a character, Dietrich's plot function develops just fine. In the beginning, his fear has him wanting to stay on the censor's good side.
It's hysterical, but you'll never get it approved. You've got to rewrite it, okay?
But perhaps since this character's suffering is more acute than the average Londoner's, and his sensibilities more impetuous, he's the first of them moved to a rash, defiant public act against the censors and all the way up to Sutler himself.
We threw out the censor-approved script and shot a new one that I wrote this morning.
And he pays the price.
As for the nameless rabble that make up the rest, their thread reaches a point of no return here, when a fingerman's murder of this girl, who we've gotten a few brief glances of,
Bollocks.
pushes the people to decide enough is enough.
Sure, it's terrible to see this happen, but she wasn't particularly endeared to the viewer, so it's only terrible in a very matter-of-fact sense.
When they all come together for an act of macro-civil disobedience to witness the bombing of Parliament, this is really visually impressive, complete with the contrasting imagery of empty living rooms and pubs, devoid of people who are no longer apathetic bystanders.
It was set up with the TV broadcast and the shipping of the masks and all that, so we pretty much saw it coming, and it came. There is a nice sense of foreboding about the final result.
Meant by Parliament. Never seen anything like it. Tanks, anti-aircraft, infantry.
What do you think will happen? Well, it usually happens when people without guns stand up to people with guns.
But when it arrives, it's about as anticlimactic as one could hope for in real life.
Bloody hell, stand down! Stand down!
But not so thrilling in fiction.
And in case you're not tired of our purely rhetorical audience polls, where we supply your reaction, and who would be?
Are you sure?
Yeah. Anyway, how inspired did you feel at this moment? We would guess not very.
And why? Because it's the culmination of a highly problematic political pseudo-message that we're going to walk all up and down in Part 4.
That's right. It's time to get political with V for Vendetta. And boy, is there a lot of red meat there to chew through. So come back and join us. And if you could like, share, tweet, comment, subscribe, and ring the notification bell.
That would be great.
Yeah, we did that.
So thanks for watching, and tell your friends.
I don't think so.
Yeah, well, we'll see you soon.